The coffee dispenser on Station Loomis 9 had been designed by a committee of 7 species, which explained why it produced something that looked like motor oil and tasted like regret. Adrian stared at the dark liquid pooling in his cup, wondering if this was some kind of test. Perhaps the consensus assembly wanted to see if humans could survive beverages that violated the Geneva Convention. He took a cautious sip. His face contorted. That bad. Adrian turned to find Sarah standing beside him, close enough that he could see the faint patterns in her skin, like veins of silver thread beneath translucent marble. Her long ears swept back gracefully, and those amber eyes held that same disconcerting focus, as though she were reading words written on his soul in a language he didn't know he was speaking. "It tastes like someone dissolved a boot in antifreeze," Adrian said, setting the cup down with more force than necessary. "I'm starting to think your people are testing our resolve." "We are," Sarah said, and there was no humor in her voice. Then her lips quirked slightly. "But not with the coffee. That is simply what happens when Voreth nutritional requirements meet Silun chemical sensitivities. The result is universally despised, which the Assembly considers a form of diplomatic equity. Equality through shared suffering, very enlightened. We have found it effective." Adrian studied her, trying to gauge whether she was joking. The Elendry were supposed to be empaths, or something close to it. The briefing materials had been vague, dancing around the specifics with the kind of careful language that suggested the intelligence analysts didn't fully understand what they were dealing with. All he knew was that her species had evolved on a world where social cohesion meant survival, and that evolution had given them an uncanny ability to read the emotional states of others. Not telepathy, the briefing had insisted. Something more subtle. Microexpressions, hormonal shifts, the barely perceptible changes in posture and breath that most beings broadcast without realizing it, which meant she probably knew exactly how nervous he was standing this close to her. "You are wondering what I perceive," Sarah said, and Adrian's stomach dropped. "That obvious. Your heart rate increased the moment I approached. Your pupils dilated. You shifted your weight onto your back foot, a defensive posture, though I do not believe you are aware of it." She paused, tilting her head in that way that made her seem both curious and impossibly ancient. "And you are embarrassed that I noticed." Adrian felt heat creeping up his neck. "Is there anything you don't notice?" "Many things. I cannot read thoughts. I cannot tell you what you had for breakfast or what your favorite color is, but emotions." She gestured vaguely at the space between them. "Those are difficult to hide. Your species broadcasts them like radiation from a poorly shielded reactor core. That's a terrifying image." "It is an accurate one." Saris reached past him and retrieved her own cup from the dispenser. She sniffed it, wrinkled her nose, and took a sip anyway. Her expression didn't change, but Adrian saw the faintest twitch at the corner of her mouth. "You are also confused and curious. And something else I do not have a word for in your language. A kind of hopeful caution. Sounds like you're describing a first date." The words were out before Adrian could stop them. He froze, mortified, certain he had just committed some catastrophic diplomatic error. But Sarah simply looked at him, those amber eyes widening slightly, and then she laughed. It was a soft sound, musical and genuine, and it caught him completely off guard. "Your honesty is refreshing," she said. "Most species spend considerable effort trying to mask their intentions. But you—" She set her cup down and turned to face him fully. "You feel first and think later. It is unusual." "Is that a compliment or a diagnosis?" "Both." She stepped closer, and Adrian became acutely aware of how tall she was, nearly his height, and how her presence seemed to fill the space around her. "When we met earlier, I felt it. The moment our eyes connected, your reaction was immediate, not calculated, not rehearsed. You looked at me and felt something, and you did not hide it because you did not think to hide it." Adrian swallowed hard. "I'm starting to think humanity is at a severe disadvantage in these negotiations." "On the contrary." Saris's voice dropped, becoming quieter, more intimate. Your kind survived your own world without the ability to read each other the way my people do. You built civilizations, explored your solar system, reached out into the void, all while barely understanding what you felt, let alone what others around you were feeling. That requires a kind of courage my species cannot fully comprehend. Or stupidity. The line between the two is thinner than most admit. She picked up her cup again, regarding the liquid inside with obvious distaste. The other delegates are watching us, by the way. The Kethrin are concerned we are forming an alliance. The Voreth think you are trying to seduce me for political advantage. The Silun believe we are conducting some form of ritual combat. Adrian glanced around the observation deck. Sure enough, several delegates were observing them with varying degrees of interest. He felt his face flush again. "And what do you think?" Saris met his gaze, and for a moment the noise of the room seemed to fade. "I think you are exactly what you appear to be. A human who looked at me and felt something genuine, and who has no idea what to do with that feeling. It is honest in a way I rarely encounter. Is that good or bad? I have not decided yet." She turned to leave, then paused. "The formal sessions begin in 20 minutes. I suggest you prepare yourself, Commander. If you broadcast every emotion this clearly during negotiations, it will be a very long day. Any advice?" Saris considered this, her long ears shifting slightly as though tuning to some frequency he couldn't hear. "Stop trying to hide what you feel. Your species is terrible at it, and the effort only makes the signal louder. Lean into the honesty. It may be the only advantage you have." She walked away, her movements fluid and deliberate, and Adrian was left standing beside the terrible coffee dispenser, his mind racing and his heart still pounding. Somewhere in the back of his thoughts, a voice whispered that this was going to be far more complicated than anyone had anticipated. He looked down at his cup, took another sip of the vile brew, and grimaced. At least the coffee couldn't get any worse. The negotiation chamber was a circular room with seating arranged in a spiral pattern, designed so that no species could claim a position of superiority. Adrian thought it looked like someone had taken an amphitheater and fed it through a particle accelerator. The chairs themselves adjusted automatically to each delegate's physiology, which meant his seat kept trying to accommodate a tail he didn't have. Every few minutes, it would inflate a lumbar support that pressed into his spine like an over-enthusiastic massage therapist. Saris sat 3 positions to his left, perfectly poised, her long ears angled slightly forward in what he was beginning to recognize as an expression of focused attention. She hadn't looked at him since entering the room, but Adrian had the uncomfortable feeling that she didn't need to. Whatever empathic perception her species possessed, it apparently didn't require direct line of sight. The Kethrin delegate, Ambassador Thrix 9, stood at the chamber's center, its translucent wings catching the light as it gestured with precise, angular movements. The matter before this assembly concerns the disputed mining rights in the Telos Belt. 3 species have lodged competing claims. The consensus requires mediation. The belt was surveyed by Voreth vessels, rumbled the Voreth delegate, a broad-shouldered individual whose name Adrian's translator rendered as something like "granite who endures." Priority belongs to those who risked resources for initial exploration. "Survey does not equal ownership," countered a Tavik, its feathers shifting through a spectrum of irritated colors. "The belt lies within traditional Tavik migration routes. We have historical precedent spanning 14 generations." Adrian's chair inflated again. He shifted uncomfortably, trying to find a position that wouldn't leave him with a permanent spinal deformity. Across the circle, he saw one of Saris's ears twitch in his direction. Was she amused? The briefing had said nothing about ear twitching. "Perhaps we should establish baseline criteria," suggested the Silun delegate, its bioluminescent organs pulsing in what might have been thoughtfulness or indigestion. "What constitutes a valid territorial claim in sectors without prior habitation?" The discussion devolved into the kind of circular argument that Adrian suspected, could outlast the heat death of the universe. Each species presented their case with meticulous detail, citing precedents from conflicts he'd never heard of, invoking treaties signed before humanity had discovered agriculture. He tried to follow the logic, but it was like trying to navigate a maze where every corridor led to 3 more identical corridors. His chair inflated again. "For the love of," Adrian stood abruptly, and the entire chamber fell silent. 7 species turned to stare at him. He realized with dawning horror that he had just interrupted what was probably a sacred diplomatic protocol. Saris was looking at him now, those amber eyes bright with something that might have been concern or fascination. "My apologies," Adrian said quickly. "Technical difficulty. Please continue." "You are uncomfortable," Saris said, her voice carrying clearly across the chamber. "It wasn't a question. The chair is trying to give me a spinal readjustment I didn't ask for." Several delegates exchanged glances. The Kethran's antennae quivered in what the briefing materials had called confusion mixed with mild offense. Adrian felt sweat forming at his collar, but Saris smiled. The furniture in this station was designed by a Voreth engineer who believed all species should share equally in minor discomfort. It is intended to discourage prolonged debate. "It's working," Adrian muttered, sitting back down. The chair immediately tried to compensate for a center of gravity he didn't possess. To his surprise, one of the Tavik delegates made a sound that his translator interpreted as laughter. "The human speaks truth. I have been trying to ignore the thermal calibration for the past hour. This chair believes I require heating elements in places I do not possess. My seat assumes I have 3 separate digestive chambers," added the Siloon, its glow brightening. "The pressure points are anatomically creative." The tension in the room shifted, and Adrian felt something unexpected, a thread of shared experience crossing species boundaries. They were all suffering through the same terrible furniture, all too polite to mention it until someone broke the silence. Granite, who endures, made a rumbling sound. "I retract my earlier position regarding Voreth engineering superiority. These chairs are an abomination." "Noted for the record," said Thrix-9, and Adrian could have sworn the Kethran sounded relieved. Saris caught his eye across the circle, and he saw approval there, clear as words. She had known exactly what his outburst would do, had probably felt the accumulated discomfort radiating from every delegate in the room. And she had helped him turn an embarrassing moment into something useful. The discussion resumed, but the atmosphere had changed. Delegates were more candid, less wrapped in formal protocol. They spoke about practical concerns rather than abstract principles. The Voreth admitted their survey data was incomplete. The Tavik acknowledged their migration routes had shifted over the centuries. Slowly, painfully, something resembling a compromise began to emerge. Adrian found himself contributing occasionally, asking questions that probably seemed naive to species with millennia of diplomatic experience. But Saris had been right. His lack of guile was an advantage. When he didn't understand something, he said so. When a proposal seemed contradictory, he pointed it out. The other delegates began directing some of their arguments toward him, as though his perspective offered a neutral ground they could all reference. During a brief recess, Saris approached him again. "You are learning quickly." "I'm trying not to start an interstellar incident." "You already did. You called the chairs an abomination. The Voreth are quite proud of their engineering." Adrian's stomach dropped. "I didn't. Granite, who endures, said that." "Yes, after you made it socially acceptable to complain." Saris's expression was unreadable. "You freed them to be honest. That is a rare gift in these chambers." "I just wanted the chair to stop molesting my spine." "And in doing so, you reminded everyone in this room that we are all embodied beings, subject to physical discomfort, regardless of our species or status." She paused, her long ears tilting forward. "You are still afraid you will fail at this. Is it that obvious?" "To me, yes. You fear that humanity will be judged inadequate, that you personally will be found wanting, and that your mistakes will reflect poorly on your entire species. She leaned closer, her voice dropping. But you are also determined, and beneath the fear there is something else, a hope that perhaps we are not so different after all. Adrian met her gaze, and for a moment he forgot about the terrible chairs, the Byzantine negotiations, the weight of representing his entire species. There was just this alien woman who somehow saw through every defense he'd ever constructed, and who looked at him as though what she saw mattered. "Is that hope foolish?" he asked quietly. Saris's smile was soft, almost sad. "I do not know yet, but I am beginning to believe it might be the most human thing about you." The chime sounded, calling them back to session. Adrian returned to his seat, which immediately resumed its campaign against his lumbar region, and tried to focus on mining rights and territorial disputes. But his thoughts kept drifting to Amber Eyes, and the unsettling feeling that something significant had shifted between them, something neither treaties nor protocols had accounted for. The station's hydroponics bay was open to all delegates during off hours, a sprawling garden beneath synthetic sunlight that supposedly helped with the psychological strain of living in a metal can floating in the void. Adrian had come here to think, to escape the claustrophobic meeting rooms and the constant awareness that every word he spoke was being analyzed by beings who had been navigating galactic politics since before his ancestors had figured out bronze. He hadn't expected to find Saris standing among the ferns. She was examining a flowering plant with delicate purple blooms, her long fingers hovering just above the petals without touching them. In the amber light filtering through the garden's dome, her skin seemed to glow more brightly, the silver patterns beneath the surface shifting like slow-moving constellations. "This is from your world," she said without turning around. "Earth. The Botanical Archive lists it as lavender. You can tell I'm here without looking. Your breathing pattern changed when you saw me. Your heart rate increased. The ambient electromagnetic field shifted slightly." She glanced over her shoulder, those amber eyes finding him instantly. "Also, you stopped walking very suddenly, which made your boots squeak on the deck plating." Adrian felt his face warm. "I'm starting to think your species has an unfair advantage in poker. We do not play poker. The concept of bluffing is philosophically troubling to us." Saris turned fully to face him. "Why are you here, Commander?" "Needed air that didn't taste like recycled regret. You." "Similar reasons. The negotiations are exhausting. So much effort spent hiding what everyone already knows they want." She moved toward him, her steps silent on the garden path. "Your species finds this easier. You do not instinctively know what others are feeling, so you have learned to simply ask. It is refreshingly direct. We also lie constantly, start wars over misunderstandings, and spend most of our time confused about our own emotions, let alone anyone else's." "Yes," Saris agreed. "But when you do connect with someone, when you do understand, it is earned rather than given. There is value in that." They walked together along the path, past rows of vegetables from a dozen worlds. Adrian recognized tomatoes and something that looked like purple carrots, but most of the plants were alien, strange geometries of leaf and stem that followed botanical rules he didn't understand. "Can I ask you something?" Adrian said, then immediately regretted it. Every conversation with Saris felt like walking through a minefield where the mines could read his mind. "You are going to ask regardless of my answer." Your determination just spiked. She plucked a small fruit from a low bush, examined it, and took a bite. "Ask. When we first met, you said you felt something from me, that I broadcast it clearly." He forced himself to continue despite the heat climbing his neck. "What exactly did you feel?" Saris was quiet for a moment, chewing thoughtfully. When she spoke, her voice was careful, measured. "Recognition, not of me specifically, but of the possibility of connection. Humans evolved in isolation, correct? You spent your entire history believing you were alone in the universe. Until about 70 years ago, yeah. And yet when you finally encountered other intelligent species, your first instinct was not fear. Not primarily. She offered him the fruit. He took it, their fingers brushing briefly. Your species is lonely, desperately, fundamentally lonely. And when you look at beings like me, you see the potential end to that loneliness. It radiates from you like heat. Adrian bit into the fruit. It tasted like strawberries mixed with something sharper, almost citrus. That's pretty heavy for a first impression. I did not say it was unwelcome. He looked at her sharply. Saris was smiling, that same enigmatic expression that made him feel like he was always 3 steps behind in a conversation she'd already finished. Your people must find us exhausting, he said. Some do. Others find you fascinating. A species that navigates the world half-blind, relying on verbal communication and crude physical cues, and yet somehow built interstellar vessels and quantum communication networks. She gestured around the garden. The Kethrin believe humans are lucky. The Voreth think you are reckless. The Silun cannot decide if you are very brave or very stupid. And the Elendry. Saris tilted her head, her long ears shifting in a way that suggested consideration. We think you are dangerously honest with yourselves. You feel something, you acknowledge it, you act on it. There is very little gap between impulse and action. It is destabilizing. Is that why you keep talking to me? To study the chaotic human? No, the word was soft but firm. I keep talking to you because you are interesting. Because you look at me and do not see a political asset or a potential threat. You see a person who happens to be alien and you are curious about that person. She paused. Also, you are very easy to read, which makes conversation relaxing. I do not have to work to understand you. I'm like an open book written in large print. With illustrations, Saris added, and there was definite amusement in her voice now. They had reached a small clearing where benches were arranged around a fountain. Water cycled through it in defiance of the station's usual obsession with conservation, a small luxury meant to provide psychological comfort. Adrian sat down, and after a moment Saris joined him. The other delegates are starting to notice, she said, that we speak frequently. There are theories. What kind of theories? The Voreth believe you are attempting to secure Elendry support for human territorial expansion. The Kethrin think I am gathering intelligence on human emotional vulnerabilities. The Tavik are running a betting pool on whether we will form a romantic attachment. Adrian choked on his next breath. They're what? The current odds are apparently quite favorable. Tavik are avid gamblers. Saris's expression remained neutral, but he caught the faintest quirk at the corner of her mouth. I believe the phrase is easy money. And that doesn't bother you, the speculation. Should it? She turned to face him fully, and he was struck again by how alien and familiar she seemed simultaneously. They speculate because your emotions are obvious and mine are not. To them, it appears one-sided, but they cannot perceive what I perceive. Which is? Saris reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and placed her hand over his heart. The touch was light, clinical almost, but he felt it like an electric current. When I am near you, your entire system responds. Your heart rate increases, your pupils dilate, your body temperature rises slightly. These are involuntary reactions. You cannot control them any more than you can control your need to breathe. Sounds like a medical condition. It is called attraction, Commander. Your body knows it even if your mind is still debating the wisdom of it. She removed her hand but didn't move away. The question that interests me is not whether you feel drawn to me. That was obvious from the moment we met. The question is whether that feeling is simply biological novelty or something more durable. Adrian's mouth had gone dry. And you're interested in finding out. I am interested in understanding what makes humans different from every other species I have encountered. You feel first and rationalize later. You form attachments quickly, across vast distances of biology and culture. Her amber eyes held his. You looked at me, an alien from a species you had never seen before, and felt something genuine. That should be impossible, and yet it happened. So yes, Commander, I am very interested in finding out why. The fountain burbled quietly behind them. Somewhere in the garden, automated systems hummed through their cycles. Adrian realized he had stopped breathing at some point and forced himself to inhale. "For the record," he said finally, "the Tavik are going to make a lot of money." Saris's smile was luminous. "I know." The crisis began with what Ambassador Thrix-9 called a minor procedural discrepancy, and what Adrian immediately recognized as a complete diplomatic disaster. The Vorath and Tavik delegations had reached an impasse over resource allocation in the Telos Belt. Normally, this would mean another 3 weeks of circular arguments and terrible coffee, but someone had leaked preliminary compromise proposals to their respective homeworlds. Now both governments were demanding their delegates hold firm, and the carefully constructed framework of negotiation was collapsing like a star-going supernova. Adrian stood in the emergency session, watching delegates shout at each other in 6 different languages while his translator struggled to keep up. The Kethrin was clicking in distress. The Saloon had gone completely dark, its bioluminescence extinguished in what the briefing materials called extreme social discomfort. Even the normally stoic Vorath delegates were gesturing aggressively, their massive hands cutting through the air like weapons. "This is absolutely perfect," Adrian muttered. Saris appeared at his elbow. "Your sarcasm is showing. Also, your stress hormones just spiked to levels I associate with humans preparing for physical combat." "I'm not going to punch anyone." "I know, but your body does not." She watched the chaos with those disconcerting amber eyes. "You are formulating a plan." Your cognitive activity increased and your breathing pattern changed to the rhythm you adopt when problem-solving. "Do you come with an off switch?" "Sadly, no. What are you thinking?" Adrian looked at the assembled delegates, at the anger and fear and wounded pride radiating from each species. "I'm thinking that everyone in this room is so focused on not losing that they've forgotten they're all on the same side." A diplomatic observation worthy of a greeting card. How does it help? "It doesn't, but this might." He raised his voice. Excuse me." The chamber fell silent. Every eye, faceted or compound or disturbingly human, turned toward him. "I have a proposal," Adrian said, his heart hammering. "What if we're approaching this completely wrong?" Granite who endures fixed him with a stare that could probably crack hull plating. "The human wishes to lecture us on negotiation. Your species has been part of the consensus for less than 1 solar cycle." "Exactly. Which means I have no idea what I'm doing and no political capital to lose by saying something stupid." Adrian stepped into the center of the chamber. "Here's what I see. 2 species arguing over resources in a belt that contains enough raw materials to supply both your civilizations for centuries. You're fighting over division percentages while ignoring the fundamental math." "The human understands nothing of our historical grievances," said one of the Tavik, its feathers rippling with irritated colors. "You're absolutely right. I don't. But I understand being stubborn because humans invented stubborn. We once fought a war that lasted over 100 years because someone shot an archduke. We're really good at letting pride destroy common sense." He turned slowly, making eye contact with each delegate. "So here's my stupid human question. What if you just shared it?" The silence that followed was profound. "Shared," Granite who endures repeated slowly, as though testing the word for structural integrity. "Joint operation, mixed crews. Profits split based on actual contribution rather than predetermined percentages. You mine together, you process together, you both benefit based on what you actually put in." Adrian spread his hands. "If one species invests more resources, they get more return. If they work more efficiently, they benefit. It's competitive cooperation." "That is not a recognized framework in consensus law," Thrix-9 said, antennae quivering. "Then make a new framework. You're all sitting here trying to force a solution into existing categories when maybe you need to invent a new category." Adrian glanced at Saris, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. Or tell me I'm being naive. That's also possible. The Tavik delegates huddled together, their feathers creating a kaleidoscope of shifting colors. The Vorath were conferring in rumbling tones that made the deck plating vibrate. Even the Saloon had begun glowing again, soft pulses of thoughtful light. The human's proposal has merit, one of the Taviks said finally. It addresses our concern about being excluded from development while acknowledging Vorath investment in initial surveys. The granite who endures made a sound like grinding boulders. It would require unprecedented cooperation, joint command structures, shared decision-making. Yes, Adrian said, it would require you to actually trust each other, which is terrifying, but probably less terrifying than continuing to fight about this for the next decade. Your honesty is either refreshing or offensive, the Vorath delegate said. I have not decided which. Both is fine. I get that a lot. Sarah stepped forward, her presence immediately commanding attention. The Elendry Communion supports exploring this framework. Commander Cross is correct that existing structures may not serve all situations. Adaptation is not weakness. Her endorsement seemed to tip something. Other delegates began nodding or making their species equivalent gestures of agreement. Thrix 9 antennae straightened in what Adrian had learned meant cautious approval. We will draft preliminary terms, the Kethrin said. This session is adjourned for deliberation. The delegates filed out, still muttering and clicking and glowing, but the anger had drained from the room. Adrian stood in the center of the chamber feeling like he'd just defused a bomb by accident while blindfolded. Saris waited until they were alone. That was either brilliant or incredibly reckless. Probably both. Am I about to cause an interstellar incident? No, you may have actually solved one. She moved closer, and he caught that faint scent he'd noticed before, like ozone and something floral. You did what you always do. You felt what the room needed and acted on it without overthinking. It is maddening and effective in equal measure. Is my stress level going down? Can you tell? Yes, your heart rate is normalizing. Your shoulders have dropped approximately 3 centimeters. You are experiencing relief mixed with residual anxiety and, she paused, her long ears tilting forward. Pride. You are proud of yourself. I might have just invented a new type of interspecies cooperation. I'm allowed a little pride. You are. Saris's smile was warm, genuine. The other delegates will take credit for refining the proposal, of course. That is how diplomacy works. But you will know that you changed the direction of this negotiation by simply refusing to accept that conflict was inevitable. Very human of me. Extremely. She reached out and, to his surprise, took his hand. Her fingers were cool and smooth, and she squeezed gently. The Tavik betting pool just became significantly more active. Several delegates apparently witnessed this conversation. Adrian laughed, the sound echoing in the empty chamber. Let them bet. Maybe we'll split the winnings. That would require us to actually confirm their suspicions. Would that be so terrible? Saris's expression shifted, becoming more serious. For you, perhaps not. You feel what you feel and accept it. For me, it is more complex. My people do not form attachments lightly. We perceive too much, understand too clearly. There is no mystery, no gradual discovery. I know exactly how you feel about me because I cannot help but know. And how do you feel about me? She was quiet for a long moment, and Adrian realized this might be the first time he'd seen her genuinely uncertain. I feel curious, intrigued, cautiously optimistic that perhaps humans are teaching me something my species forgot, that understanding everything does not mean experiencing everything. That maybe there is value in letting connection develop despite knowledge, rather than because of it. That's the most complicated way anyone's ever said they might like me. I am Elendry, complication is our nature. But she smiled, and her hand remained in his. Walk with me, Commander. We should discuss how to present your proposal in terms that will not give the Vorath delegation collective indigestion. They left the chamber together, and Adrian noticed that she didn't let go of his hand. The joint mining agreement was signed 3 weeks later in the same terrible conference room with the same abominable chairs. Adrian watched as Granite who endures and the senior TAVIC delegate pressed their respective appendages to the holographic document, their biosignatures creating a binding legal framework that would have been impossible a month ago. Around the chamber, representatives from 5 other species observed with what Adrian had learned to recognize as cautious optimism. Thrix 9 stood at the center, its wings catching the light as it made the formal proclamation. Let this accord stand as evidence that the consensus assembly serves not merely to prevent conflict, but to forge new paths of cooperation. Humanity's contribution to these proceedings has been unexpected. Diplomatically phrased, Adrian whispered to Saris, who stood beside him in the observation area. The Kethrans specialize in saying very little with many words. You said very much with few words. Both approaches have value. Her long ears tilted toward him, though her eyes remained on the ceremony. Your heart rate is elevated again. Official ceremonies make me nervous. Liar, you are thinking about what happens after this, when the negotiations end and delegates return to their homeworlds. She finally looked at him, those amber eyes impossibly direct. You are wondering if this ends with us as well. Adrian had given up being surprised by her perceptions. Am I that obvious? Always, it is one of your more endearing qualities. She watched as the delegates began filing out. The ceremony concluded. The Elendry delegation departs in 2 days. I will return to the communion and resume my normal duties as an empathic liaison. Sounds lonely. It is. My species values emotional clarity, but we sacrifice spontaneity for understanding. We know too much to be surprised by others. She turned to face him fully. Until I met you. I surprised you. Constantly. Your species feels with such intensity and acts with such conviction that you create ripples in the emotional landscape that I cannot fully predict. It is disconcerting and fascinating. She paused, and Adrian saw something vulnerable in her expression. I have recommended to my superiors that the Elendry communion establish a permanent cultural liaison with humanity. That's very formal. Yes, it would require someone with extensive experience in human emotional patterns, someone who has demonstrated the ability to bridge the gap between Elendry perception and human expression. Her lips quirked. I have volunteered for the position. Adrian felt something warm unfold in his chest. You're coming back. If your government approves the exchange, yes. I would spend 6 months on Earth, 6 months at various human settlements, learning how your species builds communities without empathic awareness. She stepped closer. I told you I was curious about what makes humans different. That curiosity has not diminished. Just curiosity. Saris reached up and placed her hand against his cheek, the touch gentle and deliberate. I perceive your hope, your fear that I am only interested in you as a research subject, your desire for reassurance. She smiled. I am interested in humanity as a whole, yes, but I am interested in you, Adrian Cross, specifically, in how you make me feel uncertain in ways I have not experienced before, in how you look at me and see not an empath or a representative of my species, but simply me. The TAVIC are going to clean up on their betting pool. They already have. The odds shifted dramatically after the hand-holding incident in the conference chamber. She traced her thumb along his jawline. Several other species have opened their own pools. The Silun are betting on how long until you use the word love. The Voreth are wagering on whether I will introduce you to my family collective. The Kethran have a complex formula involving probability matrices and emotional resonance patterns. Adrian laughed, the sound echoing in the now empty observation area. Interstellar romance as spectator sport. Your species has entertained themselves with similar observations for millennia. We are simply being culturally inclusive. She withdrew her hand but didn't step back. When I return to Earth, I will need a guide. someone who understands both human culture and the complexity of first contact situations. I might know someone, terrible at hiding his emotions, mediocre at formal diplomacy, excellent at making impulsive suggestions that somehow work. He sounds perfect. They stood there in the quiet chamber, human and Elendry, separated by millions of years of evolution, and united by something neither could fully articulate. Outside the viewport, the nebula swirled in eternal silence, indifferent to the small miracles of connection happening in a metal station floating in its glow. "I should warn you," Adrian said. "Earth is chaotic. We argue constantly, contradict ourselves hourly, and our coffee is somehow worse than the station's. I am aware. I have been studying your cultural databases. The inconsistency is part of your charm." Saris's expression grew thoughtful. "My people will struggle to understand this. Why I would choose to spend extended time among a species that broadcasts emotional noise constantly, that changes their minds without warning, that feels before they think. What will you tell them? That perhaps we Elendry have become too comfortable in our understanding, that we perceive everything but experience very little. That humans, in their beautiful chaotic way, might teach us that not knowing everything about someone makes the knowing more valuable." She took his hand again, and this time the gesture felt natural, unremarkable. "Also, that I find you personally tolerable. High praise from an empath. The highest. I do not tolerate most beings for more than an hour." The station's automated systems chimed the hour, a soft melodic tone that resonated through the chamber. In 2 days, Saris would board a vessel bound for Elendry space. In 3 months, if the diplomatic channels aligned and the bureaucracies cooperated, she would arrive on Earth. And Adrian would be there, probably nervous, definitely broadcasting emotions like a malfunctioning reactor core, ready to show her what humanity looked like when you saw it up close. "When you get to Earth," he said, "first thing we're doing is getting you actual coffee, the kind that doesn't taste like